The summer's sun over the Hudson in late July 1841 seemed unusually bright, but it could not warm the river's cold waters, which held a frightening secret. On that Sunday, two men who decided to take a boat trip near the shores of Hoboken noticed something strange, swaying rhythmically on the waves at the entrance to a grotto known to locals as Sybil's Cave. Approaching closer, they froze in horror. Before them lay the lifeless embodiment of what, only a few days prior, had been the most talked-about beauty in New York. It was a young woman whose face, despite traces of time spent in the water, retained features of extraordinary attractiveness, once luring hundreds of men to a tobacco shop on Broadway. News of the terrible discovery spread through the city like wildfire, and soon the name Mary Rogers became synonymous not only with beauty, but also with the deepest mystery that forever changed the face of American justice and literature. New York, in the mid-19th century, was a seething cauldron where luxury coexisted with incredible squalor, and order was a very conditional concept. At that time, the city did not yet know centralized policing in the form we are accustomed to today. Security was provided by scattered detachments of night watchmen, often consisting of people seeking only easy money or the opportunity to legally use force. It was in this atmosphere of uncertainty and growing urban chaos that Mary Rogers' popularity blossomed. She worked at John Anderson's shop, and she was called the beautiful tobacconist. Her presence behind the counter turned a simple purchase of cigars into a social event. Famous politicians, writers, and simply wealthy wastrels came there not so much for tobacco as for a fleeting glance or smile from Mary. She was a symbol of a new urban culture where female attractiveness became a marketing tool, and private life turned into a matter of public domain. The tragedy began on July 25, 1841. On the morning of that day, Mary left her mother's home, saying she was going to visit her aunt. She seemed calm and cheerful, dressed in a light summer dress, which would later become one of the few pieces of evidence in this complicated case. However, she did not return by evening. At first, this did not cause panic, as a few years earlier in 1838, Mary had already disappeared for several days, which was later explained by her desire to rest from the intrusive attention of admirers. But when a day passed, and then a second, anxiety began to grow. Her fiancé, Daniel Payne, a man of complex fate and unstable character, rushed around the city searching for his beloved, but all was in vain. The city, which yesterday adored her image, suddenly became a silent trap for her. The discovery of Mary Rogers' remains off the coast of New Jersey instantly turned a private disappearance into a national scandal. The newspapers of that time, just beginning to realize the power of sensation, clung to this story with a death grip. James Gordon Bennett and his publication, The New York Herald, began a daily chronicle of events that resembled a detective novel more than a dry news summary. Journalists not only covered the facts, but they shaped public opinion, made accusations, and conducted their own investigations, often hindering official bodies. It was at this moment that it became clear that the old law enforcement system was completely dysfunctional. The lack of coordination between the authorities of New York and New Jersey led to valuable time being lost, and the site where evidence was found was not properly examined. The superficial layer of the conflict lay on the surface. It was a clash between a growing metropolis and its own vices. Crime in New York at that time was organized and audacious. One of the initial theories regarding Mary's demise was an attack by one of the numerous gangs operating in the vicinity of Hoboken. This place, popular with daytime revelers, transformed into a dangerous zone after dusk, where city laws held no sway. Witnesses claimed to have seen a group of young people crossing the river that ill-fated evening, and their behavior seemed suspicious. However, evidence was negligible. Mary's clothes, later found in a wooded area near Sybil's cave, were neatly folded, contradicting the theory of a chaotic and brutal attack. These items, a silk scarf, gloves, and a light cloak, seemed silent witnesses to a secret rendezvous that turned into an irreparable tragedy. The internal conflict of the situation affected those closest to Mary. Daniel Payne, her fiancé, was under intense public scrutiny. His despair seemed genuine, but oddities in his behavior fueled the darkest rumors. Sometime after the tragedy, he committed an act that completely baffled the investigation. He went to the place where Mary was found, and there, in a fit of unbearable emotional pain, voluntarily ended his earthly journey, leaving behind only a note asking for forgiveness. Was it a gesture of remorse from a guilty party, or an act of ultimate despair from a loving person who had lost the meaning of existence? The answer to this question remained buried with him. Another important participant in the drama was John Anderson, the owner of a tobacco shop. Rumor had it that his relationship with Mary went beyond purely business, and that her popularity was so beneficial to his business that he might have concealed important details of her personal life to preserve the establishment's reputation. At a deeper ideological level, the Mary Rogers case exposed a crisis of morality in rapidly changing American society. In those years, a woman working in a public place and attracting male attention inevitably faced double standards. On the one hand, she was admired. On the other, she was suspected of frivolity. Mary's tragedy became a catalyst for discussion about women's safety in urban environments and the right to personal space. A philosophical paradox emerged. The more society knew about the beautiful cigar girl, the less it understood the real Mary Rogers. She became an idol, stripped of human qualities in the eyes of the press, an object for speculation and theory-building that satisfied the crowd's craving for spectacle, but did nothing to establish the truth. The situation changed dramatically when Frederica Loss, the owner of a small hotel in Hoboken, became involved. Several months after the events, she stated that on that day, Mary Rogers had come to her establishment, accompanied by a mysterious man with a dark complexion. According to her, the pair had gone into the woods, and later screams were heard from that direction. However, this testimony was given under strange circumstances, as Mrs. Loss herself was on the verge of ending her life due to an accident. Her words sparked a new wave of theories, including the assumption of an unsuccessful medical intervention, which at that time was illegal and often carried out in deep secrecy. This version indicated that Mary might have been a victim of circumstances related to an attempt to conceal the consequences of a close relationship, which fundamentally altered the perception of the crime. From an act of external violence, it transformed into a tragedy of private choice and social hopelessness. The culmination of public tension came when it became clear that the official investigation had reached a dead end. It was at this moment that a man stepped onto the scene whose name forever linked a real crime with the world of literature. Edgar Allan Poe, who closely followed newspaper publications, saw in the Mary Rogers case ideal material for his new analytical method. He wrote a story titled The Mystery of Marie Roget, moving the action from New York to Paris and replacing the Hudson with the Seine. While changing names and settings, Poe nevertheless preserved every minute detail of the case. His character, Auguste Dupin, using pure logic and deduction, tried to identify the criminal without leaving his study. This was the first time in history that a work of fiction claimed to be a real investigation. Poe argued that his analysis pointed to one person, a sailor or soldier who had access to a boat and knew the area. The writer believed that logic was stronger than the chaos of evidence, but even his genius was confronted with the fact that reality is always more complex and uncompromising than any schemes. The resolution of this case never came in a courtroom. No one was officially accused of Mary Rogers' demise. However, the resonance of her passing was so powerful that it literally forced the city authorities to reform. By the mid-1840s, it became finally clear that New York needed a unified, professional, and accountable police force. In 1845, the New York Police Department was formed, becoming the prototype for all modern police structures. The tragedy of one girl, whose life was cut short too soon and under such strange circumstances, became the catalyst for the creation of a system designed to protect thousands of others. The lessons of this case are still relevant today. They remind us how easily public opinion can turn into a tool of persecution, and how important objectivity is when emotions run high. Today, the story of Mary Rogers is perceived not just as an old criminal case, but as an important cultural code. It taught us that behind the facade of urban bustle and bright signs, there are always living people with their fears and hopes. We see how the media space can distort the truth, creating myths that live for decades. Mary's case showed that truth sometimes eludes even the sharpest minds, leaving behind only questions and a bitter taste of injustice. But it is this incompleteness that makes us return again and again to the banks of the Hudson, peering into the fog of the past. Looking at those events from the height of our time, we understand that the Sibyl's Cave no longer holds secrets. It has become merely a part of history. But the spirit of that time, the shadows of old New York, and the image of a young woman whose beauty became her curse continue to stir the imagination. Mary Rogers' death was not in vain, in the sense that it forced society to look in the mirror and be horrified by its own imperfection. Every mention of this story is a tribute not only to the victim, but also to all those who seek truth in a world full of illusions. And as long as the waters of the Hudson continue their flow, the mystery of the beautiful tobacconist remains a reminder that some stories never end. They merely change their form, continuing to live in the lines of books and in the memory of generations. 200 years later, we are still trying to understand what happened on that hot July day. Perhaps the answer will never be found, and therein lies the ultimate paradox of human existence. We strive for the light of knowledge, but it is shadows that make our lives truly deep and meaningful. The story of Mary Rogers is a mirror reflecting humanity's eternal quest for justice and the unchanging complexity of life, where every step can be decisive and every decision irreversible. And when we close this page of history, we carry with us not only facts, but also the feeling of that thin line separating bright hope from a deep, unfathomable mystery hidden in the quiet flow of the river. Edgar Poe's investigation became not just a literary experiment, but a manifesto for a new genre. He proved that the human mind is capable of structuring chaos, even if that chaos is caused by the darkest impulses. His method of deduction, born from the tragedy on Broadway, became the foundation of the entire global detective tradition. We can see echoes of the Mary Rogers case in every modern thriller, in every series about forensic work. This is a legacy of pain and search that transformed into an intellectual tool. However, Poe himself, in later editions of his story, made changes that indirectly confirmed Even he admitted defeat in the face of real circumstances, which turned out to be far more prosaic and at the same time more terrifying than his logic had assumed. Society at the time demanded answers, and when it didn't get them, it created its own legends. The name Mary Rogers became a byword, a symbol of the lost innocence of the big city. In this context, her fate echoes the fates of many others who found themselves in a whirlwind of events beyond their control. The transformation of public consciousness that occurred after this case affected not only law enforcement, but also the ethics of journalism. Unspoken boundaries were established regarding how deeply the press could intrude into private life, although these boundaries are still constantly tested today. We learn from the mistakes of the past, understanding that the pursuit of ratings and circulation should not supersede human dignity. Today, as we pass by the modern skyscrapers of New York, it's hard to imagine that on these very streets, a drama once unfolded that brought the entire country to a standstill. The shadows of the past have been erased by time, but the lessons remain. We know that the safety of society depends not only on the number of people in uniform, but also on our ability to empathize and strive for objectivity. The mystery of Mary Rogers is not just a cold case from the archives, it is a living history lesson about how one event can change the trajectory of an entire civilization's development, reminding us of the fragility of human life and the eternal search for truth, which, like river waters, is always in motion, eluding definitive definitions. Ultimately, this story brings us back to the beginning, to that very morning when a young woman in a light dress left her home, unaware that her name would live on through the ages. Her path was short, but its echo still resonates. This echo is heard in every new law protecting citizens, in every line of a detective story, in every honest journalistic investigation. Mary Rogers has become a part of us, a part of our culture and our understanding of justice. And in this endless cycle of events, we find meaning. Even the darkest mystery ultimately serves the light, if we are willing to learn from it and move forward, keeping in our hearts respect for the truth and the memory of those who departed into the silence of history. Concluding this narrative, we understand that the case of the beautiful cigar girl remains unresolved. But perhaps it is precisely in this incompleteness that its true meaning lies. It forces us to think, to doubt, and to search, preventing our minds from becoming rigid in certainty. And each time the sun sets over the Hudson, painting the waters in crimson hues, we recall that beauty and mystery always go hand in hand, reminding us of the grandeur and tragedy of the human journey, which continues despite everything. 1841 is long past, but its pulse is felt in our everyday, in every striving for a better and more just world that we build on the foundation of the past, remembering every lost life and every unsolved mystery that made us who we are today. This historical narrative reminds us that the true power of storytelling lies not only in identifying the culprits, but also in understanding the context that makes such events possible. New York in those years was a city of contrasts, where every intersection could become the site of a fateful encounter. Mary Rogers was a product of her time, ambitious, vibrant, and ruthless. Her popularity was both her protection and her vulnerability. When we analyze her life, we see not only a beautiful girl, but also a social phenomenon that anticipated the emergence of modern celebrities and the culture of universal attention. Her tragedy became the first high-profile case where private life was completely consumed by public interest, leaving behind only a vacuum of unspoken truths. For over 30 years after the events, John Anderson continued to claim that Mary's spirit haunted him, testifying to the incredible psychological burden that this case placed on all involved. Guilt, fear, and public censure intertwined into a tight knot that could never be severed. The moral climate of the era, which demanded impeccability from women and forgave much in men, created conditions in which truth became an unwelcome guest. It was this ideological conflict that became the main obstacle to justice. We see how stereotypes and prejudices can blind even the most honest investigators, leading them astray from obvious facts in favor of public expectations. The contemporary resonance of the Mary Rogers case lies in its universality. It is a story of loss, of the imperfection of the law, and of the power of words. Edgar Poe gave Mary immortality, transforming her suffering into art, but he also placed a responsibility on us, the responsibility to remember the real person behind the literary image. We must realize that behind every sensational headline lies a living soul whose feelings and dreams were cut short in an instant. This realization makes us more humane and cautious in our judgments. History not only teaches us facts, it cultivates empathy within us, without which it is impossible to build a harmonious society. Every detail of this case, from the forgotten handkerchief to the fiancé's last letter, is part of a vast mosaic that we continue to assemble. And though many fragments are irrevocably lost, the overall picture is clear. It is a picture of humanity's search for meaning in a world where chaos seems all-powerful. But it is precisely in this search that order is born. The creation of the police, the reform of the judicial system, the development of forensics, all these are the fruits of the pain brought by Mary's demise. We live in a safer world because society was once shaken to its core by this tragedy. This is the great paradox of progress. It often arises from the ashes of the deepest upheavals. In conclusion, I want to return once more to the image with which it all began. A young woman at the entrance to the Sibyl's cave, a symbol of beauty that became a symbol of sorrow. This image should serve not only as a reminder of the mystery, but also as a call to vigilance. We must not allow the shadows of the past to obscure the needs of the present. The truth may be hidden deep underwater, but our desire to find it is what makes us human. May the story of Mary Rogers remain in our memory as a warning and an inspiration, as a complex lesson that we must learn so that tomorrow will be brighter and fairer for everyone who walks the streets of a big city in the rays of the morning sun. The story continues in our thoughts and actions. We are the inheritors of that era, and it is our task to maintain the balance between freedom and safety, between interest in another's life and respect for its secret. Mary Rogers passed into eternity, but she left us a key to understanding ourselves. And as long as we ask questions, as long as we seek answers, and as long as we remember, she lives in our collective consciousness, reminding us that no life passes without a trace, and no secret remains completely silent if there are those who are willing to listen to it. The light of the Hudson in 1841 and the light of our screens today, it is the same light, searching for truth in the darkness of the unknown.